As the player has surely noticed, the first phase in the game is called the morale fatigue point accounting phase. The morale fatigue point system is an overlay on the entire game and is basically an accounting system to determine how the health of the armies are respective to each other, and eventually in most cases will determine the actual winner of a battle or scenario. It is a simple plus and minus type system, and eventually when an army reaches its fatigue or army morale fatigue point level, at that point thereon, it will start going down in morale automatically across the board. So in a way, it is an army morale level type system. It doesn't deal with individual units or individual commands. It is the whole health of the army or the whole health of a player's side. It involves the command order system, so there is some interaction, and the usage of the orders determines how fast your MFP levels are utilized. It will also affect individual units' morale only when the MFP level has been exceeded. So, how does the MFP affect units in the game? Well, for one thing, morale in the game, a unit's morale, is affected by the situation it's presently in. If it's under a charge situation, it might have to take a morale check for a charge. Its losses to date will affect how it behaves on the battlefield with its morale checks. The orders that it's under could affect it. The tiredness of the unit. Did it have to march to the battlefield before it actually arrived at things? It will all add towards the MFP level usage. And overall, what is the health of the army itself? Are they winning? Is it inflicting more losses upon the enemy? Is it making them do more order changes or create order violation situations? All these things apply under the morale fatigue point system. Sounds like a lot to a player, but actually mechanically it's very simple. The secret of the morale fatigue point system is, of course, your opponents do not know what your total number is at any given point during the game. They can roughly estimate it, and if somebody really sat down and really wanted to calculate it out, they can probably figure it out. But since commands are not necessarily always deployed on the board, they can still be in block movement or hidden or something of that nature, or they may not have actually even arrived on the tabletop. The MFP level will be in a constant state of flux, so the ability to calculate it out is going to be very estimatable at best. So neither side knows what the other side level is. They have to play the game accordingly onto their best assumptions of what the thing is. Our level higher than the other side, or is it lower? That can have an impact on how you command or maneuver your units on the tabletop. So let's go over the calculation process. How do you get to this magical MFP number, shall we say? Well, it's actually very simple. In front of you right now is the morale fatigue point table. So all you have to do in your rostering system is add up, if you use an automated rostering system, it'll be done for you automatically. But if you had to do it by hand, it's quite simple. First things, you have to determine if you have an infantry or cavalry unit, or if it's an artillery or train unit. And then depending upon the size of the unit, in figures, for infantry or cavalry, or just the battery itself, you are assigned a certain number of MFP points per that unit, for each unit in other words. And the number of points assigned is based upon the size of the unit and its morale grade. So if you have a line grade unit, that's a 5 through 7 CMR, and it is a 4 to 7 figure size, you get 2 MFP points for that particular unit, either cavalry or infantry. If it's an artillery battery, it would go out to be automatically 2 points for the battery. You add up all the points, and that gives you a total for an individual command. Now each command is also going to have an additional set of points, and as you can see they're broken out here, based upon this command structure or the level of that individual command. So a typical divisional or brigade type command will only contribute 5 MFP points to the total of all the units total, which gives you the whole command's total. Obviously you're going to have several divisional or brigade level commands, and they're going to have maybe a corps or wing type command, which will be their hierarchy of command, and that individual corps or wing will add 15 points. If you go even higher up to an army or nation level command, those individual commands give 25 points. So in summary, it's just a matter of adding up the total points. And this is typically seen on a typical roster. And if I pan real quickly to the left here, you have a roster, very typical, And on the automated roster system, on the far right-hand side, you have the MFPs being summed up. In this example, this is a corps level structure, a headquarters, and this is an individual division of infantry. You add up all the points available in your army, and that's your total army's MFP value. Now what's actually the point level on the table is simply based upon the commands which are actually on the table. If they haven't even arrived at the battlefield yet, then those individual commands points are not added into the total until they actually arrive. If a command for some reason leaves the battlefield area entirely, then its commands or MFP value is subtracted from the army's grand total. So it makes it in theory weaker. So as units arrive, the value grows. As units retire or leave, the value diminishes. Now, how do you count or add up your morale fatigue point current running total, shall we say? You've got this big number at the top, and that's the number that you hopefully will never strive and reach for your side. But as you take losses, each figure loss, for example, is going to add 1 towards the total, which is the running total towards the MFP. Each hourly turn for your order cost is going to add points towards the MFP. So you need to be very efficient in the usage of your orders. If you're using an attack order, for instance, and it's costing you 4 MFP per hour to run or utilize that command, you better be attacking on the tabletop and not sitting back and just doing desultory long-range artillery bombardment. That's not what it's used for, the attack order. You'd be much more efficient having an engage order, which only costs you 2 points per hour. So there is a higher level or player's utilization of the order markers, which gives a higher level sense to the game and interfaces with the morale fatigue point system. Now, of course, if you can force the player to use order violation situations, where he uses a unit which violates their actual orders for the current phase, then that's 2 points per unit. So again, that's going to add dramatically to the MFP total, and hopefully you'll force your enemy over their respective number eventually. Because once you've reached the MFP total for your army, and the next point you go over or exceed it, at that point, on the next hourly turn, your entire army, all units and commands, every unit is going to have an adjustment of -1 CMR, or it's gone down 1 across the board in the army. And if you ever reach a point where you're at 150% of your MFP total, well, then it's down 2 per hour. And this down 1 per hour is going to apply for each hourly turn thereafter during the game. So eventually, in theory, your armies could just simply go to 0 or worse. God help you if you happen to take a morale check for any reason. It's nothing worse than being a militia grade unit that's starting with a 4 and you're down for -2 for the MFP for 2 hours of the game you've gone over. That makes you now a base 2 to take any morale check. And last but least, the MFP has a system of making things equalize when you have an extreme of like a French old guardsman versus a Spanish militiaman. In the game, if you bought the army strictly on a point basis, there'd be an awful lot of Spanish militiamen on the table, armed with a musket, versus very few French old guardsmen. So effectively, the tactic for the Spanish would be is just get within musketry range of the old guardsmen and keep shooting at them, and eventually you're going to cause them to break and rout from the field. It's just sheer numbers theory here, basically. If you got 20 Spanish running around in front of 6 Frenchmen, you're going to eventually win simply because of the sheer odds. The old guardsmen may hit them and break them, but they can't get rid of them fast enough while they're shooting at them. But if you put the morale fatigue point system on top of that, eventually the Spanish, simply because of their losses, is going to exceed their number. And even if the French Old Guard exceed their number, they can afford to go down several steps because they started at 10 or 11 value. So if they go down 3 or 4 steps, and so what, they're a 7 or an 8, they're still a viable unit on any tabletop. Where the Spanish, if they started as a 4, and they went down 2 or 3 steps, and they ever had to take a morale check, it might be a 1 or a 0 to start with, and consequently they're just going to scatter and run away, which will even increase the MFP because they will then count as unit losses when they rout off the table. So eventually the Spanish would dissolve right in front of the French Old Guard. It's sort of a case if you go up with the French Old Guard, hit the first Spanish unit, it routs away, and the rest of the Spanish simply would just run away, which is historically basically what would happen. The rest of the Spanish normally would not suddenly get their hearts up and say, well, you just pulped my brother over there, I'm going to go and stand in front of that express train of the French Old Guard and get pulped too. They wouldn't. They would just scatter across the countryside, which is the reason why elite forces have a tendency to win battles horribly outnumbered against irregular or ill-trained units. And last but least, from a game designer's point of view, you can use the morale fatigue point system to create unique scenarios or unique adjustments in the game. Like if you need to hold this position, you can give an award a player or side additional victory points, or you can give them additional MFP points, which is simply actually holding the position. Sort of stresses or makes the player's actions on the tabletop a little bit more predictable. And of course, you can always make it as a function of victory conditions. You have to do certain things, which again is a lot easier to adjust using the MFP system, or the total of the MFP for each respective army, compared to trying to adjust the morale of whole units or making special units and things of that nature in the game. It's a very adjustable system. The best thing I can suggest from a player's point of view is you play and get used to utilizing the system and how it interacts with the players. Because when it comes down to it in the end, the morale fatigue point system is going to be the decider of the victor of the battlefield. Because when once army goes over, technically most of the time, most players are going to say, that's it, we have to withdraw from the table, because their army will physically do it for them if they don't elect that action.